Solar PV Cast by Shift, a podcast exploring solar energy and the role it plays in improving our lives and our planet. Here's your host, Chris Palliser.
What is the real cost of energy? Because when it comes to cost, perhaps it's more appropriate to think of not what we can afford, but what the planet can afford. That's right. We're going deep on this episode of the podcast. This is the Solar PV Cast. My name is Chris, and joined by Senior Project Engineer from Shift Energy Group, Steve Unger. Steve, thanks for joining the episode today.
Great to be back, Chris.
So what is the real cost of energy? You actually reached out to me, and we thought, okay, let's dive into this one. So I'm gonna pass this one off to you to get started.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And I'm just gonna, start off by, and I know they say, never apologize at the beginning of your talk, but I'm gonna do that and say this is either going to be the best episode or the worst episode, depending on how things go, because we may get a little bit deep, a little bit philosophical, and I don't know where it's going to go.
I love it. Let's dive in.
The bottom line is, I guess probably a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from one of our off-grid clients who was telling me that their battery kept getting drained. So we took a look at the logs, tried to understand what was going on, and they had this basically intermittent load that was going on and off, on and off, on and off constantly that was using up about 600 watts. Now, to put that in perspective, that would be like 6 incandescent light bulbs. What other things? Yeah, it's not a huge amount of power, but when you're off grid in particular, it uses up a lot of energy. The more important thing is it was almost constant, right? So it's ongoing all the time. So it was just draining their batteries. So what was happening, because it's still February, or I guess it's March now, but it was February then, the client was basically then having to run their generator to charge their battery back up because there's not enough sunlight right now.
Right.
And then it would drain down, and they'd turn the generator back on, and it would drain down. They were getting really frustrated with this. So they called up and said, "What's going on?" I said, "You have something running in your house all the time." And they looked around. They finally came back. Well, he said, "You know what? Our toilet is running a little bit. There's a bit of a, glitch in the whatever valve inside of it. And our toilet's basically leaking a little bit of water."
Yeah.
So I said, well, that's it. What's going on is your toilet's running, which means because you're off grid, your pump has to come on to, refill your cistern, blah, blah, blah. So you have this whole knock-on effect of that. The bottom line is this little running in your toilet, and who at home hasn't had this happen where, it's not a big deal when you're on grid or when you're living in the city, but for them, this running toilet was costing them, probably something like $20 or $30 a day in gasoline just to keep their generator going on.
Right.
So of course they went and, tweaked it, had it fixed, and problem went away. But it got me thinking about, this is a big deal. At home, we don't really worry about a running toilet.
Yeah. Right? I had one last week. I had to replace the fill valve. It wasn't working.
Yeah.
But you don't think about it.
You don't think about it because water's so plentiful, energy's so plentiful. But when you're in this situation, this little running toilet thing literally cost them a couple $100.
Yeah. Wow.
And it got me thinking, well, that must be the same case. The problem is all of our costs when we're living on grid is all externalized. So that water that was running in our toilets, in your toilet, the municipality had to get the water. They had to clean the water. They had to filter it. They have to pay people to take care of that water, to manage the whole system.
The infrastructure to get it to the house.
Exactly. There is costs involved in that. That's also water that isn't available in the environment to do something else. That in the summertime isn't there, when we need the water.
Yeah.
There's also obviously energy costs associated with that water because we have to pump it into place. We have to, build whatever.
At the end of the day, whether you're off grid or in the city, you got to get the water to the house.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of costs involved in those things that we don't necessarily see, on a daily basis.
Totally.
And I guess that's part of, like we talked about before, where I like the whole off-grid thing so much because it forces you to really think about how you live your life. And you have to live with intention, and you have to realize that energy is really precious.
Yeah.
The other thing I was a while ago, reading an article that talked about, what was the cost of lighting your home? 1,000 or whatever thousands of years ago, the cost of lighting your home was really expensive, right? To go off and make a candle, you would have to go find a source of fat someplace.
Right.
Whether that was, from a whale or, some oil source. It was really expensive. And I can't remember the exact numbers. I should have looked it up before this podcast, but it was something like it took like a month worth of work to light your house. To get that candle made, to put it in your bedroom at night. Exactly. Wow. Exactly. Yeah. You don't even think of that anymore. Yeah. And then over time, it got more efficient, right? When we started off with the first electric light bulbs, Thomas Edison. Yeah. But it was still, light bulbs were like really expensive. Yeah. Like it was like, the equivalent of $1,000 today's dollars to buy a light bulb. Right. So as a result, you have these, pictures from, 200 years ago, well, maybe not 100 years ago, one small light bulb in a room, and they're trying to write, and they must have had terrible eyes because of it. Yeah. But because it took like a month worth of salary to buy the light bulb and to pay the electricity. Yeah. Well, and there's an appreciation that's lost in us today. Yeah. Because, we talk about my parents, for example, they always say to me, you're trying to heat the outside. I remember that growing up, if you leave the door open. Yeah. Because when they were growing up, they appreciated heat because in England, it was stone walls. Not that they were castles in the 50s, but just, that wasn't the thing, right? And now, man, my kids leave the door open all the time. I'm like, come on. It's you lose that appreciation. Totally. Yeah. And I remember, when we built our house, we had to do the energy analysis for the house and, to figure out all the insulation. And I, it was like down to the painstaking things of figuring, what's the thermal bridging of the, the plates and all this stuff. And so we did all these analysis and, I sized the wood stove based on, all this stuff. And then you're right. We moved into the house. It's like, it doesn't matter about all this stuff and, about the triple pane windows. My kids walk out of the house in the middle of January and just leave the door wide open. And we just lost more energy out of that, 5 minutes than, but that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. But it does result in, I now have to go chop more firewood now the kids go and chop more firewood. Yeah, nice, but anyways, nice. So again, the cost comes back to them. Yeah. But just to finish off the light bulb story, something like now, the actual cost of lighting your house is like negligible, right? It's cents. Yeah. The result is people don't think about it anymore. Yeah. And I'm the same as you. My grandfather, he would always say, turn that light off. If you're not in that room, if you're not using it, turn that light off. That's costing me real money. Totally. I mean, this could go so deep, right? Again, this whole North American society where we take so much for granted. Yeah. And you don't realize it until it's gone. I read this book to my daughters a couple weeks ago, actually. It's called A Squash and a Squeeze. And it's a children's book, and it's about this lady who's complaining she lives in a very small little house. Right. So this wizard comes along and says, well, bring the cow into your house. She's like, why would I bring the cow? Just bring the cow into your house. Brings the cow in. Next week, this house is too small. It's too small. Right. I got me and the cow. Bring the chicken into the house. Right. Brings the chicken in. As you can tell, it keeps going, and at the end of the book, this house is too big. What do? Take everyone out. All of a sudden, she realizes she's got a massive house. It's the same thing with power. It's the same thing with everything.
The future is now. The Solar PV Cast by Shift.
The other thing realizing is that, money seems to be the way our world runs, right? That's how we basically, I guess, enumerate everything. The fact of the matter is money is a virtual creation of humans. Yeah. Right. It doesn't actually exist in nature. Yeah. Money has become a proxy, though, for energy and time in our society. Right. There's that expression, time is money. Yeah. So when I look at, these people, having to spend $20 a day just to keep their toilet full, that $20 had to come from someplace. Right. So there was energy that created that $20. So there's also time that created that $20. So the example I use with my kids is, you leave this door open, that just costs whatever amount of money. That money has to come from someplace. That means I have to go spend more hours working. Right? So you say I don't spend enough time with you. I'm not saying they do. Well, sometimes they do, but that's all. The fact of the matter is when you waste that kind of things, that's hours of your life that you won't get back, that you've just donated or given to do something with. And that, I think, in a lot of ways, is the most valuable things that we have is our time, right? Because we have a X number of minutes. We don't know when we're born, but we have only a certain number of minutes in our life that we can do things with. And we have to be very intentional about that.
Yeah, and like you said, it's so connected. Everything's intertwined, and the current generation, I mean, not even generation, so many people don't understand that unless you lived 100 years ago and you took all that for granted. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, money came about because people's time. It's kind of like time was before money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, time has already existed. Energy has already existed.
Yeah.
Or always existed. There's there's a lot of really good books by Jared Diamond talks about, the whole energy transition. I think it's Guns, Steel, and I can't remember the exact name. Really good book. But he basically says that slavery didn't end because we got all moral, which there was an aspect of that. Slavery ended because they found a cheaper energy source. Right, slaves originally were the cheapest energy source around.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we found coal.
Right.
Coal became a cheaper energy source. We stopped using coal because we found fossil fuel. Well, I guess coal is a fossil fuel, but we found oil.
Right.
Oil was
gas.
cheap, and gas, etc.
Right.
The good news is now, and I did figure out a way to bring this back. Solar is now the cheapest energy source on the planet.
Right.
On an industrial scale, we can generate solar for about 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is significantly less than nuclear, oil, etc. So that's the positive story out of this. But again, as humans, we need to be intentional with this. The downside of renewable energy is all of the renewable energy that's been developed or been implemented in the world now, almost none of it has actually offset any fossil fuels. It's all basically allowed us to keep using more and more energy.
Right.
So
and we've talked about that before. We're not slowing down our energy use. We're just finding other ways to create it.
Right. And that will increase over time, but I mean, I firmly believe, and this is the philosophical part, that we as humans do need to use less energy. We need to be a lot more intentional about the use of energy. And that ultimately is the other half of the equation. We need to find less environmentally impactful energy sources, which solar, wind, maybe small scale hydro is. We also have to stop using so much.
Yeah. We've talked about this before too. I met a couple that got a solar array on their house, and they got something like 80% offset.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, this is great. It's not 100, but hey, 80%. Well, it took them about a month to look at each other and say, hey, let's use less energy, and then we got 100% offset.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to get more panels to cover your whatever you need, how about we just save ourselves a few bucks, get less panels, and use less energy?
Yeah, and of course we do that in our day-to-day living, right? If you're going out and you're budgeting and you say, well, I'm actually, in a deficit, well, you have two choices. You either go out and get another job, or you earn more money, or you ask your boss for a raise, or you go back and you look at your expenses and say, well, I'm going to cut out, I'm going to go down to 1 coffee a day instead of 2.
Yeah. So what changed? Is it the media? Is it society? Why do we not think of using less? Why do we just find a way to use more and pay for more?
Oh God. I mean, talking about going down a rabbit
yeah,
hole.
I know. But honestly, everything, we're surrounded by information, and that information is constantly telling us to spend more, to get the new car, to keep up with the Joneses down the street.
Yeah.
It's almost like our default now is, there was something that happened around my house a couple of nights ago. The police were in the neighborhood. And so my wife says, we need to get better locks. We need to get security cameras. We need to get this. We need to get this. So all of a sudden you're like, yes, we need to get. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so that our default is now use more, get more.
And maybe you're right. Maybe it is a lot of media because, some of the other stats I said that the actual amount of crime in around the world is actually less than it was, even 20 years ago. And again, if there's anyone out there who can contradict my stats, this is all anecdotal. I don't claim to be an expert on that. But the world, I think in some ways, at least in our part of the world, is safer than it was. But maybe we're just exposed to more of that now, and we see more of it going on, and we just assume because we're hearing more about it that, it's a more dangerous place.
Yeah. It's information overload. Again, it comes back to 100 years ago, 200 to 1,000 years ago, we as humans weren't designed to absorb the amount of information we currently absorb.
Yeah.
Social media, everywhere you go, you're absorbing, you're reading, you're learning, which is great.
Yeah.
But there's a downside to that information as well.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, the human brain, from what I understand, was designed or had grown to basically be able to live in a community of about 150 people, because your brain could connect, keep those connections between 150 people. So you would know who's related to who,
right.
Who knows who's married to who's, whatever going on with it, right?
Yeah.
Once you get beyond that number, typically that's where, in older societies, like that tribe would split. Once you got much beyond the 150. Nowadays, we live in cities of, Alan came from Mexico City, 20 million people living in one city.
Yeah.
Right? It's huge. It's too much.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that creates stress on you, and then you start, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, we're going down a huge rabbit
totally.
hole.
I mean, and to bring it back, the chat today is, what is the real cost of energy? And my mind goes right to the Matrix.
Yeah.
We are the real cost of energy.
Yeah.
Our lives.
Yes.
Our time.
Yes.
Not to get again. I mean, we keep saying the word deep, but in the Matrix, humans are powering the world, and that's effectively, we are the cost, whatever that looks like to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And I mean, the first thing you need to do is look at how you're spending your energy and your time.
Yeah.
And you need to make intentional choices about that. And I would suggest use less energy as much as you can. And then go out and buy solar panels and all that stuff, right?
Well, that's the thing. You use less energy, you need less solar panels. And not saying like, hey, buy less solar panels from Shift.
Right.
But we'll get more projects. Guaranteed. Because all of a sudden, solar's more affordable.
That's right.
You don't need $30,000 anymore. You just need, $15,000.
Yeah.
Because you're using less energy.
Yeah. So, anyways.
Well, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great conversation.
We'll see what everybody else thinks. But
yeah. Leave your comments, like, subscribe, check it all out. This is the Solar PV Cast. We did touch on solar a little bit.
A little bit.
Steve, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
The Solar PV Cast by Shift with Chris Palliser. To begin your solar journey, visit shift.ca.